These are joint seminars organized by the Department of Education and Center at Hall at the University of Oxford. I'm Maya Changseviani, Associate Professor of Comparative and International Education. I'm the convener of these seminars. Before introducing our speaker, let me attend to a few administrative points. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online in due course. We only record the first half of the webinar, the presentation. We will not be recording the Q&A due to the GDPR regulations. Therefore, can I ask that everyone keeps their cameras off until after the presentation? Please keep yourself muted throughout the webinar, unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. To ask a question, use the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. At the end of the presentation, if your question is selected, you will be invited to ask it yourself directly. When you are invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video and state your name and where you are from. It's really nice to introduce yourself, and some people forget to do that. We have 3 more seminars planned for this summer. In the next few moments, I will share a link in the chat to the webpage where you can learn about the topics of the forthcoming seminars and book your place. Now the best part comes, introducing our speaker. Our speaker today is Dr. Miguel Antonio Lim. Miguel is Senior Lecturer in Education at the University of Manchester here in the UK, enjoying the unusual sunshine. Miguel is based at the university's School of Environment, Education and Development. Miguel researches generally education and international development. He's particularly interested in transnational and international higher education. Our speaker is originally from the Philippines and has worked in a variety of countries and roles in the higher education sector. Miguel has worked in the Philippines, in France, in Denmark, and in the UK. I hope I have not missed the country. Miguel is founding convener of the China and Higher Education Network based at the University of Manchester. He serves on the editorial boards of Compare, Journal of Comparative International Education, and also on the editorial board of Higher Education Quarterly. We are very pleased to have Miguel joining today. Miguel will speak about equal transnational partnerships in higher education and will present Sino-Foreign case studies. The floor is yours, Miguel.
Thank you so much, Maya. And if you don't mind, I'll start by sharing my slides. Are you able to see the slides now? Thank you so much. Yeah, okay, great.
Thank you, it's great.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much, Maya, for the invitation. I'm glad to be speaking to, well, everyone who's present at the webinar today, your students and other guests of this series. Earlier on, I mentioned that in the UK, there is an unusual amount of sunshine. So I'm really happy to be here. And my only regret is perhaps that some people might be indoors a little bit longer this afternoon than they otherwise would have been or maybe they are outside in the sunshine listening to this webinar. But in any case, really, I'm glad to be here, glad to speak to, well, to you, Maya, and to everyone else about this topic. Equal transnational partnerships in higher education, with a focus especially on Sino-Foreign case studies. So as a kind of like way to understand like the wider issues around transnational partnerships. So let me just, well, this is the outline of what I'll be speaking about today. Hopefully we'll get through these with enough time for questions and answers at the end, which is like the final, I suppose, like point on this outline. But I'll just go through context, some conceptual ideas, very briefly about the research aims of this particular presentation or the body of work behind this particular presentation, some methodological notes, really then the juicy bits, the findings, and then kind of like a discussion, which I'd like to continue with everyone on the webinar. So first of all, there are like 3 contextual issues that I wanted to raise. Really, the first is something that I think most of us attending the webinars or those people interested would already know, that there are increased forms of international and transnational education, that there's increased mobility of academics, students, institutions, and organizations. And then this is just really like wider context. There's increased numbers of partnerships, international partnerships, there are increased number of students and academics and even some professional staff members between universities moving around in what's known as an international, or some people describe a transnational space. That is just the phenomenon, and there are too many studies about these general trends to mention here. But just to be more specific about the context that we're talking about today. So to ground this concept in a particular transnational or two-nation or several nation context, let's look at China. Higher education in China has also rapidly developed in the last decades, and higher education in particular is seen as a key feature of building up China's knowledge society, seen as central in China's economic and then wider cultural and political development. So you have kind of specific policies that are related to this discursive goal. For instance, the Chinese world-class university initiatives. Some of the people in the call might know the projects 985, 211, and the double first class initiatives project, which are all forms of excellence initiatives. So excellence initiatives are kind of funding projects to try and direct funding to certain universities so that they can, improve and compete on a global stage. And then specifically on transnational partnerships. So in China, China uses joint ventures or these international partnerships with foreign or other countries' universities to, according to Feng, accelerate its efforts to globalize its own higher education sector. So there are kind of also many studies about this, trying to understand the various forms of partnerships with China. First, of course, because of its rapid development, also because of its size, the number of Chinese students who are participating in international higher education. So all of these reasons means that China is a major player on global higher education and a major kind of partner for many countries, including the UK, where we are currently based. And then the last point about this context is really that education is also playing an increasing role in China's foreign and global policies, including the Belt and Road Initiative. So there are, as we will see later on in the presentation, issues around China's foreign policy goals that involve education, or where education is implicated as a means for China to achieve its foreign policy initiatives. Yeah, it may not be the main. Other examples of sectors involved in those would be infrastructure, obviously, defense. But education is seen as kind of like a soft side or soft part, soft diplomacy part of these foreign initiatives. Oh, sorry, there was this extra point specifically about TNHE. It was also seen as a way to improve accessibility to higher education in China. So in a way to help in the massification or in the increase in the number of higher education students in China. And the idea that bringing the Chinese and foreign partners together would carry mutual benefits. So again, it's just a follow-on on the earlier contextual point. The third contextual point is a little bit about, I guess, the researcher. And I just think that sometimes in research presentations, this aspect is a bit left out. And I think when we do carry out research in international or comparative education, much as in elsewhere, I think the identity and the positionality of the researcher matters as well. And that it might help the people understand where I'm coming from, or perhaps my biases or the blind spots that I have with respect to speaking about the issues that we'll be talking about today. But in any case, some people call this me-search, the sense that, oh, this is what explains why I'm personally interested in these issues. So I've worked for many years in higher education, including in, might say, administration or professional services roles, including in the management of international academic partnerships. And I did that for several European universities. One global partnership I was involved partners from the UK, France, Singapore, and the United States. So there wasn't a Chinese partner, but that was very much part of the discussion of that group. Some of the previous work that I've also done included ethnographic work on university rankings and also on internationalization strategies in university contexts. So that's just some of the professional services or administration work that I have done in higher education that informs my perspectives on these issues about quote-unquote equal partnerships in transnational education. I also wanted to say that what I'm presenting today is really work that I've collected and gathered together with colleagues here at MIE, the Manchester Institute of Education, and one particular colleague who I work with in Denmark, at Aarhus University in Denmark. I think I saw several of them in the participants list. So it's just to say that one particular paper with Heather Cocaine, Gauche, and myself. So this is kind of where the core skeleton of this presentation is coming from. So this is a paper entitled Pursuing Ideal Partnerships, a Discourse of Instrumentalism and the Policies and Practices of Sino-Foreign Higher Education Cooperation. But I've also drawn on some of my own sole authored work in the past about Asia and kind of like these world-class university initiatives in China. I'm also working with some of my PhD students on transnational education, particularly Huili C or Stella C, and Bowen Zhang. I think I also saw her on the course. In case I make any mistakes, they're here to perhaps help me out or correct me if I misrepresent our collective ideas. But the point is just to say that I'm building on work that is clearly not just my own, but as a result of my professional practice with professional colleagues, as well as my research that I've done in collaboration with many different research colleagues. And I think this is a good way to do research by being very collaborative. Okay, I mentioned that I speak a little bit about conceptual notes or theoretical notes. So obviously in the field of transnational higher education, there are lots of definitions involved, most notably those of Jane Knight and McNamara. They'd identified kind of 40 competing definitions of international and transnational education. It would take too much time to go through all of those, but I would like to draw in particular from the work of Jonas Steer. So Jonas Steer is a philosopher of education, so his work is in intercultural studies. He has a little bit of work as well in internationalization in education, but I'll outline his ideas, which I think are particularly relevant for this presentation. Yeah, so this definition, I guess, of internationalization from Steer's work in 2004 is what I thought about and was interested in, where he described internationalization in education as that could be understood in three ways: as a state of things, which is basically a description; as a process, so actually not as a kind of like as an object, but as a kind of process of becoming to something, so it's always in flux, or that there are processual elements involved. And the last one in particular I found very interesting, his idea that internationalization is a doctrine. So the sense that internationalization brings together certain collective beliefs or engages people in certain collectivization of beliefs. And that, I think, is something that I'd like to think about more, especially with regard to what we're talking about today, the idea of an equal partnership. And I've placed equal, at least in my title, in quotation marks, because I do want us to reflect on these beliefs that we have about what is a partnership, an international partnership, and what is an equal partnership. And I think here we are entering into the world of beliefs and doctrines and of shared meanings, which is why I think this this latter point of Steer, internationalization as a doctrine, I find is very, very important and interesting. So with regard to that, to go even further into this idea of a doctrine, Steer highlights several kinds of beliefs that we can have about internationalization. One he describes as idealism. In other words, internationalization is a good in itself, that we need to pursue internationalization. So again, the belief that internationalization is good, full stop, which means people coming together from different countries, countries working with other countries, this is good. And that is why we need to have more of it. And that is why, for instance, to go back to some of my earlier work in rankings, that's why rankings try to measure it or have indicators for internationalization. And they say that, oh, any world-class university should have international students, should have international academics, should have internationally co-authored papers, because they're good in themselves. That's why we have them as indicators. Yeah, and therefore, these are the hallmarks of a world-class university. Okay, so that's one belief about internationalization. right, which has an effect. So based on these beliefs, your idea of what is a partnership and what is an equal partnership will be affected. Yeah. Here, in the first idea, any partnership is a good partnership, right? Because any kind of international engagement is good in itself. So it doesn't, well, I mean, I guess there are differences, but the point is any kind of partnership is a good partnership. Second, there's this idea of educationalism, which is slightly more in the educational field, right? Like that internationalization enriches the overall experience of staff and students and leads to their Bildung, or lifelong learning. So Bildung is what's a German word and a kind of like Germanic concept that means kind of total learning or total education or self-actualization. I've seen it referred to in the literature, self-actualization. So here, internationalization is more closely linked, or this belief that it's more closely linked to the educational mission, right, of universities and higher education institutions, that internationalization is necessary as a component of self-actualization, that we need, so it serves this educational purpose that when we encounter people from other countries and ideas from other countries, then we become more fully human or fully educated. Yeah, so this is a slightly more nuanced form of, I guess, the first one, which is idealism. Here it's specifically about becoming a full person, right? In the sense of the Germanic Bildung person, the self-actualized person. And finally, there's also internationalization and the belief about it as an instrumental good, that internationalization is a means to an end, instrumentalism. And this is where I would like us to concentrate on with respect to this idea or debate, especially in China. So it's particularly, I think, relevant in its application to the Chinese case. We will see the sense that internationalization is an instrumental good for an end or a purpose, right? That's not necessarily good in itself or about education, but could be about other things. But just the point is that internationalization has a purpose, and it's up to the actors to determine what that purpose is and to achieve it. Right. So in terms of instrumentalism in international education, there is also a lot of literature here, especially in policy journals. Policy journals tend to bring in a lot of politics, right? The political perspective into, well, any paper that appears in a policy journal normally has this political perspective. So journals that talk about education policies are, it's easy to use, or they're sympathetic to the application of this particular framework, instrumentalization of internationalization. But even here, the scholarship presents the interests of the sender or the dominant partner. So for instance, the work of Graf, Lucas Graf, 2009, uses the varieties of capitalism approach to study the approaches of different sender countries, or different, quote unquote, dominant partners, we could call it, in terms of how they interact with other countries. So he does a comparison between British and German universities in terms of their internationalization strategies and setting up international partnerships. I had a chat with Lucas to tell him that I think it was a very good paper, really very useful to apply this kind of varieties of capitalism model, which is an econometric model, to the field of international education. But I told him, and he seemed to agree with me when he told, but I said, the perspective of the receiving country or the other partner is absent. So in the presentation of, or at least in the study that he did, it was about, okay, so this is how Britain, because of its variety of capitalism, which is market-oriented capitalism, this is how it sets up its partnerships. And this is how Germany, with its ordoliberal system, you know, like it's not as market-oriented as the British higher education system. This is how it sets up partnerships. But then I said, what's lacking in this perspective is the perspective of the other side. What happens when Britain has a partnership in the US? Is it exactly the same as an international partnership in China or in the Philippines or in another country, right? So I said that perspective is missing, and perhaps that's something that we will explore precisely in the next couple of slides. And well, Graf argues very usefully that there is an importance of this institutional complementarity and comparative institutional advantage, which are two ways of saying that, like there is a kind of capitalism involved. People are looking out for their interests, but then the kinds of ways that quote unquote academic capitalism or higher education capitalism works is different in kind of different countries like the like the UK and Germany. And it means that they will engage in international partnerships in different ways. So that will affect the choice of study cases, as we will see later on, that insight from Graf. But the research aims really to study the differences between foreign and local understandings of international higher education partnerships and determine what, if any, are the understandings of equal partnerships, right? Or fair or good partnerships, yeah, or ideal, as my colleagues Cocaine, Gao, and I, we use the term ideal partnerships in our previous work. So notes on the methods, and I'll probably just go quickly over this because I realize that I am speaking a little bit too long. So we did a document analysis of policy documents. Our case studies were the Sino-British College and the Sino-Danish Center. So as I said, these are informed by the Graf framework. So we chose a kind of more market-oriented approach, and the Sino-Danish Center represents a different approach. So Denmark, just like Germany, the higher education system functions in a different way. Students don't pay fees to go to university in Denmark. In fact, the Danish government supports fees. So it functions but the Danish economy as well functions in a different way. It's a more, I would say, like complete welfarist state than, say, the UK. Yeah, the co-authors, my co-authors, previous co-authors conducted an ethnographic study. I wanted to conduct an ethnographic study of my own about the Chinese university setting up a campus in another country, but unfortunately, due to COVID, it was impossible to collect that specific ethnographic data. So hopefully that will be topic for another webinar with Maya and with colleagues. So findings. So here's an example of, well, this is a picture of Nottingham Ningbo, which is seen as one kind of like an archetype of this kind of partnership, or at least of the branch campus type of partnership. Later on, we'll see that there are many kinds. But this is an iconic one because of its visibility and as well as like the architecture, its quote unquote first mover place in kind of like the conceptual space of transnational education in China. So the fact that you have like recreation of the Nottingham campus, but also Chinese kind of style high-rise buildings on the campus. And it kind of opened up you might say, the imagination or the policy space in China for experiments or different kinds of transnational higher education partnerships. Yeah. So there are three distinct kinds, according to Mock and Han. There are institutions like Nottingham Ningbo University, the picture which you just saw. These are called Chinese Foreign Cooperation Universities, and they are standalone organizations. They include Nottingham Ningbo, NYU Shanghai, Xi'an Jiao Tong Liverpool University, and several others, right? So this is a smaller group in terms of actual numbers, but they are, I would say, the most autonomous group of institutions. There are also institutes affiliated to Chinese universities, often with second-tiered universities. So not always, but like institutes nested within a university that are linked to a foreign university, like the Edinburgh University in Zhejiang. So the Zhejiang Edinburgh, I think, Institute it's called, or the Dongbei Surrey University Institute. So kind of, they're not standalone universities, but the kind of foreign university sets up a partnership or an institute nested within a Chinese university. And then there are, individual programs affiliated to Chinese universities. Joint undergraduate programs or joint master's programs are examples of this. So this is the most numerous, and you might say the most perhaps easy to administer. So lowest resource form of partnerships that is possible. So as you can see, this is the scale in 2018, which is an important date, as we will see. So as of September 2018, there were 9 Chinese Foreign Cooperation Universities, 79 institutions, Chinese Foreign Cooperation institutions, and a lot, over 1,000 cooperation programs. Yeah. Later on, we'll see 2018 is an important date because China shut down a lot of, they had a reorganization. So they shut down a lot of, they closed down a lot of these Sino-Foreign partnerships, and then they opened a new set of Sino-Foreign partnerships. So there was kind of like a evolution or reshuffling, right? Like, and we will see kind of like the policy goals of China in terms of what they consider to be more ideal partnerships when we look at the partnerships that they closed down and the partnerships that they started. So these partnerships are governed by what a policy called the Chinese Foreign Cooperation in Running Schools, which is a highly development-oriented policy. So basically a policy for national development. It's a nation-based policy that draws on foreign expertise where desirable for national development purposes. I think one of the key features of the CFRS is the rule of the 4 1/3, right? So it says that there has to be a minimum, so the whole point of this is that there has to be, in a partnership, a minimum contribution on the part of the foreign partner to the partnership. So basically, this idea is saying, China set up these regulations to say, you can't just come to China, set up a foreign partnership, and take and take and take from China. The idea is if you come and set up a partnership as a foreign higher education institution, you need to contribute. And here they even gave a number or a specific proportion. They said at least 1/3 of teaching hours, of teaching staff, of courses, and of aspects of the curriculum as a whole need to be informed by the foreign partner, which means the idea, the sense is that China wanted, in its earlier part, these were from 2006, these principles, wanted to draw in knowledge resources, knowledge and human capital from the foreign partners into China. And that's what is behind this 4 indices of 1/3 policy. And later on, we will see it plays a role, this kind of proportion, magic number, in how the evolution of this concept of equal partnership takes place. There's also a updating of these policies in 2013. So there were positive advice and constrictions in terms of, oh, okay, right, like even more concrete guidance about what should be avoided and what should also be promoted in terms of these partnerships for the sake of national development. And here are just some examples of that. For instance, like negative things to avoid. Impose strict control in the disciplines of business management and other disciplines that China has tried to curb. In other words, disciplines where the policymakers felt that the value add was very small, or to be quite frank, courses where China felt that foreign partners were just coming in to get tuition fees from students without much in return. So large-scale courses, very high student to teacher ratios. So China wanted to avoid these, and they just so happened to be in the fields of business and management. Yeah. Impose strict control over the entry of foreign resources and protect China's educational sovereignty. This is interesting, and I'll show you another example later on, because there's also this evolution of this idea of bringing in. Now it's bringing in, but make sure that we have control or supervision over the educational resources that come from the outside. So in a way, it's an evolution, or some might say even a contradiction of the previous guidance, but it is because there is a greater sense of wanting to have defend China's education sovereignty according to this point, and also control over the education resources. Some of the positive advice included collaboration between strong partners, making sure that the foreign partners are great or famous universities. The idea is that we should partner only with quote-unquote top-ranked universities to make sure that there is a valuable transfer of knowledge. And not just that, but to have those partnerships in disciplines where China is quote-unquote wanting, weak, or blank. In other words, areas where China wanted to improve, right? Like, and these normally tended to be in the STEM fields and STEM subjects, as we will see later on, STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And then this other part here, which also demonstrates this kind of evolution from the 2006 policies, maintain the dominance of Chinese institutions in the partnerships and that should be utilized, sorry, utilize the foreign resources to the service of China. So here it's, again, it's, yes, bring in resources, but make sure that the Chinese partner has the higher proportion of input into the partnership. So again, to the sense that the Chinese partner should maintain sovereignty and control. So there's no time for me to go into the concrete details of the Sino-British College and the Sino-Danish Center, but it's just to say that they were chosen because they were a consortium. So one Chinese partner and a consortium of universities from the UK, particularly from the north of northern England, where Manchester is based, and also from Denmark. So they were interesting to compare because the Sino-British Center was a partnership of all of these northern English universities. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then in the Sino-Danish case, there were 8 universities. At that time, they represented all of the Danish universities and their partnership with China. So just to go briefly, what I will say is that the Sino-British Center, the Sino-British College functioned as a, I mean, if you'd like to know more, please do read the paper that will be in the slide of references to find out more about this institution. But to at the risk of oversimplifying, this was a kind of slightly more market-oriented partnership where it was about student flows, you know, like tuition fees, and kind of like a partnership where students could spend 1 year, eventually, or 2 years in China, and then the rest of their degree in the United Kingdom. This was the kind of like model of this Sino-British College, quote unquote, traditional student mobility partnership. And there was a degree of revenue generation involved as a priority in this particular partnership. Then the Sino-Danish Center, as you can see here, these were the Danish partners, and the Chinese partner was the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the University of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So here, I would say they introduced what was known as the 50-50 policy. So what the important takeaway here is that rather than having this rule of 1/3, from the very beginning, they said, all of our policies at the Sino-Danish Center will be 50-50. So the Danish side will contribute half of all of those resources, educational resources, teaching staff, curriculum development, all of that will be 50 rather than 1/3. So we will go above the 1/3 and reach 50-50 to achieve a equal partnership. But then, as my argument here is that our reading of this equal partnership is a political reading of equality. So just as this rule of 1/3, 4 indices of 1/3 is also a political statement about what should be an equal or ideal partnership. And here you have an example of an institution that responded to that policy goal, you know, the policy goal of the Chinese side to say, okay, we have to have minimum 1/3. And the Sino-Danish Center said, we will do 50%, not just 33%, but 50%. And not just, so here you will see a very political aspect to this partnership. So you see the Queen of Denmark, she's in the middle here, going to China for the groundbreaking of this partnership. Again, there were exchanges at the highest political levels about this. So it was not about revenue generation or really about large numbers of student exchange, but really about Denmark trying to be a quote unquote equal partner or trying to be involved in the development of Chinese technologies, establish economic relationships in these high-tech sectors with China via its higher education partnerships in the Sino-Danish Center. I can see Maya now.
So sorry, I'm trying to interrupt. If you could, if we could go towards the conclusion, it would be great. So that
very good. I think that was the main idea, that this evolution of this 50-50 partnership was seen in this kind of state. But you could see as well in terms of the, you know, like these reforms of the closure of 234 partnerships and then opening, I just looked at the numbers now of 215 new partnerships. And what you will see is that, again, this instrumental idea of China by setting up new partnerships in areas which it felt it wanted more input in. So in other words, STEM subjects. The other thing that I would say is that, so China has also tried to reorient its partner countries. Of course, here you have the traditional partner countries, the US and the UK. But this new graph shows that now there's also a political objective of partnerships. So it's not just about knowledge resources, but about partnering with certain countries. So some of these emerging countries are Belt and Road Initiative countries. And so here you have a sense as well of China being very instrumental in its internationalization partnership choices, or making sure that, oh, we have to have partnerships with these countries. For instance, Russia, which is a key BRI country. So this is the discussion, really the movement of this market model to a political model. We could discuss that more in Q&A if you'd like. The use of political capital to achieve this equality, you might say, or this ideal partnership. A move of student-oriented flows to resource flows as well was something, whether they were economic resources or political resources, was something that I guess is something to be considered in equal resources. And then later on, we can discuss what will happen, like post-COVID, with respect to these partnerships, what will change. Yeah, so I have kind of like further ideas about, or that we could discuss, I would like to discuss with the floor about what people think, those who are based in China, who are more knowledgeable about these issues. How will COVID change these international partnerships? These are things that I'd like to discuss with, well, colleagues on the floor. And just again, like these are the, well, the kind of, not the references for the whole presentation, but the work that I've done with colleagues informing the presentation for today. Thank you very much for the time, Maya.
Thank you so much, Miguel, for a very good, very solid and clear presentation. I imagine you must be a great teacher.